Hello there, Eric Teacher here, and today we're going to start exploring what philosophy is and why it helps us just think better. We're going to use Nigel Warburton's A Little History of Philosophy as our guide and meet some thinkers who ask some big questions about knowledge and life. So let's get started. Okay, so what exactly is philosophy? Well, philosophy is the study of thinking. It's the art of asking big questions and thinking carefully about those answers. It helps us wonder about life, knowledge itself, and what's right and wrong. Philosophy is asking questions about everything. It's learning to think clearly and deeply. Philosophy is about making better decisions in our everyday life. And most importantly, it's about understanding yourself and the world around you. Two of the biggest philosophers are the ones who started it all. Socrates, a Greek thinker who became famous for asking questions that really made people think, and his own student Plato, who explored what knowledge really means. Okay, and I already see our first hand up. And your question? Right, why study philosophy? Well, I've got the answer right here. Firstly, it improves your thinking. It trains our brain to think more clearly, to figure out which questions are important, and that helps us to solve problems creatively. Next, which is really important, it helps us spot bad arguments. We'll be able to see when people are using bad reasoning or bad logic. And that's super useful for schoolwork or just having conversations with your friends and family. And then lastly, it also helps us to understand each other better. When we disagree and we are arguing about something, it helps us to be more respectful and to use evidence and to try and understand the other person's point of view. Philosophy teaches us all of these things and more. So since philosophy is about asking questions and learning, it's also about how do we gain knowledge. And so here are 4 big ideas about how we do that from philosophers. Now, first, some philosophers believe that we can only know and gain knowledge from our senses. What we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, these gain experience, and we learn. But others say, well, learning happens entirely in our mind. So it's just we gain knowledge through reason, logic, and thinking alone. And still others say, well, it's kind of both. But it's mostly about the physical world, what we can see and observe. That's where knowledge occurs. That's where it happens. And yet, still some say, well, yes, it is both, but we also need to accept that there are things beyond what we can really be sure about. There are things beyond what we can see and what we can comprehend. So let's talk more about these 4 views on knowledge. So the first way that we can understand knowledge is from experience. As I said before, this is when we learn by seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling, interacting with the world around us. And it's also how, in science, we learn about the world around us. We do experiments, we observe carefully, and that reveals the truth. And that's how we gain knowledge. It's from our experiences directly. And there's even a philosopher, John Locke, who believes that who we are is entirely about our experiences. We are born completely blank. And as we experience things, that's what builds who we are. And David Hume even says that our idea of cause and effect, this happens and this happens, all comes from our experiences because we experience it every day. And a way that we can see how this kind of knowledge is important and learning is that if we ask ourselves to try and close our eyes and describe an object as best as we can, and then open our eyes and look at that object and see if there's anything you missed in your description. And then we should think about how does actually seeing it change how much we know about it. So next, let's talk about learning and knowledge that comes just from thinking in our minds alone. Imagine you can prove something true just by thinking about it. Who thinks that sounds like magic? So some philosophers say that reason and thinking can give us real knowledge, even if our eyes and ears might be wrong. Thinking carefully can reveal truths that we cannot simply just see. A good example of this is math. If I say 5 plus 5 equals 10, you don't need to see 10 apples right in front of you to know it's true. We can know that it's true just by thinking it, the rules of the value of numbers. And we use rules and thinking to prove things all the time. That is why math works every time for everyone. And just by this logic alone, we have philosophers who use thought experiments, thinking about what if questions to test ideas. René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," to show that if you doubt everything, but you can still think in your mind, then that proves you exist. So try this. Ask yourself, if you subtract a number by the same number, what does that give you? And how can you know without seeing it? So we can see that thinking and reasoning is a powerful tool for knowledge. And if we think clearly, then we can find answers even if our senses are confused. So next, let's talk about how some philosophers say the physical world, thinking, why not both? So we can have knowledge from the physical world and from just thinking. Two things can be true, but that doesn't mean both have the same importance. Some philosophers say, yes, both are true, but we should only trust what we can see, touch, and measure the physical world. Like Epicurus. He believed that everything was made of atoms and that we should just focus on nature and what's real. In other words, there's no point in trying to look for invisible forces, spirits, ghosts. Skip all that. As a matter of fact, later scientists and philosophers called empiricists say if we can't observe it, if we can't test it, don't believe it at all. And still, some people disagreed. Other philosophers thought, why can't knowledge from experience and knowledge from thought and reasoning be equal? And so, to look at that, we need to understand that our senses, our experiences provide us information about the world, and our minds shape and organize that information. And concepts like justice and love and numbers are all very much real, even though they're invisible. A philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant, he believed that without experience and reasoning, that we're basically blind. We need both. And to really think about this, we should ask ourselves, is fairness something you can see, touch? Is it something you can measure? And if not, how do we know it's real? So all of this comes together to show that philosophy has given us a toolkit on how to think. Philosophy tells us that we should ask good questions, that we should always ask why and how do we know, that we should always test our ideas and our beliefs. And we should think about, what are we assuming to be true? What do we think is true in what we're saying? And how do we know? And it also teaches us that we should not just argue politely, but that we should always be sure to bring facts and logic and not just use emotion to show that we're right. And with that, that is all the time we have, everyone. Until next time, goodbye.